The moment Caleb Harlan's hand closed around hers in the dusty street, time fractured. Maggie felt the entire town watching, not with delight, but with disbelief. A man like him. A woman like her. It shouldn't be possible. Yet here she stood, 37 years old, plain as prairie grass, feeling his calloused fingers steady her trembling ones while whispers cut through the air like winter wind. "You're making a mistake," someone muttered. Caleb's jaw tightened. "The only mistake," he said quietly, "would be letting her go." How did an invisible woman become the only one a powerful man could see? Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far Maggie's story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust that tasted of disappointment and new beginnings. Maggie Fletcher stepped down onto the wooden planks of Ridgeway's Main Street, her worn traveling dress clinging to her in the September heat. She was 37 years old, soft around the middle, with graying hair she'd pinned back severely that morning. Her face was kind but unremarkable, the sort of face that disappeared in crowds, that people forgot moments after looking away. She had learned to expect this, Miss Fletcher. A thin woman in a severe black dress approached, her mouth a tight line of professional courtesy. "I'm Mrs. Adelaide Pritchard. We corresponded about the position." "Yes." Maggie's voice was steady, practiced at hiding the small heartbreaks of being perpetually overlooked. "Thank you for meeting me." Mrs. Pritchard's eyes swept over Maggie with the efficiency of someone conducting an inventory. Not unkind, but clinical. Assessing. Finding nothing remarkable, which was perhaps a relief to them both. "The widow Thompson is quite particular, but I believe you'll manage. You have references from Boston, 3 families. All satisfactory, satisfactory." Mrs. Pritchard nodded. "That will do nicely. Widow Thompson doesn't require excitement, Miss Fletcher. She requires competence and invisibility. Can you provide both?" The words should have stung. But Maggie had built calluses over such cuts. "I've had considerable practice at both, Mrs. Pritchard." A brief flicker, approval, perhaps, crossed the older woman's face. "Then follow me. The widow's house is just beyond the church." Ridgeway was like a dozen other frontier towns Maggie had passed through, wood frame buildings fighting against the relentless sun, a main street that turned to mud when it rained, and people who moved with the careful purpose of those building something fragile in an unforgiving place. Men tipped their hats as they passed, but their eyes slid away from her. Women offered tight smiles that never reached their eyes. She was already categorized, spinster. Employed, harmless, invisible, the widow Thompson's house sat behind a white picket fence that had seen better days. Inside, the rooms smelled of old sachets and older memories. The widow herself was a brittle woman of 80-some years, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, who looked at Maggie with the frankness of someone who no longer bothered with pretense. "You're plain," she said by way of greeting. "Yes, ma'am, and past your youth, considerably, good. I'm tired of pretty young things who spend their time mooning over ranch hands and deserting me for marriage. You look like you've given up on such nonsense." Maggie felt the familiar tightness in her chest, part relief, part resignation. "I'm here to work, Mrs. Thompson. Nothing more, see that you remember it." The widow gestured with a gnarled hand. "Your room is upstairs. Small, but clean. I expect you dressed by 6, breakfast at 7, and you'll read to me after lunch." "My eyes aren't what they were." "Can you read without putting me to sleep?" "I'll do my best, everyone says that. Most fail." But there was something almost approving in the widow's tone. "Mrs. Pritchard says you come from good families in Boston. Why leave?" The question Maggie had answered 100 times, each time sanding down the truth until only the acceptable version remained. "The families grew up, ma'am. Children went to school. Households changed. It was time to seek a new position." What she didn't say, that she'd watched 3 generations of beautiful daughters marry while she remained the trusted, invisible spinster aunt. That she'd held babies who would never be hers, celebrated weddings where she'd never be the bride, and finally understood that some women were meant to witness life, not live it. The widow studied her with unsettling intensity. You're running from something, from nothing, ma'am. Toward something new, same thing, usually. But the widow waved her hand dismissively. Go settle in. Town council meeting tonight, they're arguing over the schoolhouse repairs again. You'll accompany me. I like to know what foolishness the men are planning. That evening, Maggie found herself in the small town hall, seated beside the widow in the back row. The room smelled of tobacco and ambition, filled with men in work-worn clothes and a few women who'd earned their place through widowhood or sheer stubborn persistence. The discussion was tedious, budgets and lumber costs and arguments over whether the town could afford glass windows or should make do with oiled paper for another winter. Maggie let the voices wash over her, preparing herself for the quiet life she'd chosen. Usefulness without love. Purpose without passion. It was enough. It had to be. Then the door opened. The change in the room was immediate and visceral. Conversations died mid-sentence. Men straightened in their chairs. Even the widow beside her shifted, suddenly alert. The man who entered moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd never had to prove himself. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years under an unforgiving sun. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, and his eyes, pale gray, almost silver, swept the room with the thoroughness of someone who missed nothing. Harlan, someone breathed. Caleb Harlan, the widow whispered to Maggie. Owns the Circle H, biggest spread in 3 counties. Lost his wife and son 5 years back. Hasn't been to a town meeting since. Maggie watched him take a seat near the front, men instinctively making space. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the attention. Simply sat, removed his hat, and waited with a patience that felt almost predatory. The meeting resumed, but the energy had shifted. Proposals were suddenly more carefully worded. Arguments became discussions. When Caleb Harlan finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, and carried an authority that had nothing to do with volume. The schoolhouse needs more than repairs. It needs rebuilding. He didn't stand, didn't raise his voice. I'll provide the lumber at cost and 10 men for the work. The children deserve better than what we're offering. That's generous. Harlan, the mayor said carefully. But the budget isn't my concern. The children are. Silence. Then, reluctantly, nods of agreement. The matter was settled in under a minute. Maggie found herself studying him despite her better judgment. There was something in his stillness that spoke of deep waters, of grief worn smooth by time but never forgotten. He didn't fidget. Didn't perform. Simply existed with a completeness that made everyone else seem somehow less solid. The meeting dragged on, water rights, fence disputes, a proposal for a lending library that made Maggie's heart lift briefly before being tabled for lack of funds. She was preparing to leave with the widow when a commotion erupted near the door. I don't care what your meeting rules say. A woman's voice, high and panicked. My boy is missing, been gone since afternoon. The room erupted. Men stood, voices overlapping. The woman, young, worn thin by frontier life, was crying now. He went to play near Copper Creek. He knows to be home by supper, but it's dark and he's only 7, creek's been running high, someone said. Rain last week, we need to organize search parties, it's too dark, he's a child, the voices rose, chaos threatening. And then Caleb Harlan stood, he didn't speak. Didn't have to. The room quieted as if someone had drawn a curtain over sound itself. How long? He asked the mother. 4 hours. Maybe 5, he nodded once. Copper Creek forks 3 ways past the Miller place. North Fork is shallow, boy could cross it. East Fork runs deep. West Fork leads to the canyon, we should check all 3, not in the dark. We'd lose more people. Caleb's voice was steady, factual, without emotion. The boy is smart or he's not. If he's smart, he stayed by the creek where he could be found. If he went into the canyon. He didn't finish. Didn't have to. The mother made a sound like something breaking. Maggie didn't plan to speak. Didn't even realize she was standing until she heard her own voice, clear and calm in the charged silence. The boy is 7, you said. All eyes turned to her. She felt the weight of their attention, surprise, mostly, that the invisible woman had found her voice. Yes, the mother whispered, then he's old enough to be frightened but young enough to remember what he's been taught. Maggie kept her voice steady, reasonable. Has he been to the creek before? Dozens of times. I've told him. The mother's voice cracked, then he knows its dangers. Which means if he's not home, he's either injured or lost his way in the dark. Maggie looked at the assembled men. He wouldn't go into the canyon, too frightening. The deep fork, too dangerous. He'd stay near where he knows. The North Fork, where he feels safe. Caleb Harlan was looking at her now. Really looking, with those pale gray eyes that seemed to see past the worn dress and graying hair to something underneath. Something she'd thought long buried. She's right. His voice cut through the murmurs. The boy would go where he feels brave, not where he feels scared. North Fork. Near the crossing stones, but it's dark. I know that creek better than I know my own land. And he gestured to Maggie without taking his eyes from her face. She understands children. We'll need both, Mr. Harlan. I couldn't possibly, Maggie started. You just did. He was already moving toward the door, men falling in behind him. He paused. Looked back. You know children. I need that. Coming? It wasn't quite a question. Maggie glanced at the widow, who made a shooing motion. Go. I can find my own way home. Make yourself useful. 10 minutes later, Maggie found herself on a horse for the first time in 15 years, following Caleb Harlan through darkness broken only by lantern light. 4 other men rode with them, but she was acutely aware of Harlan ahead, the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with his horse as if they were a single being. Stay close, he called back to her. Creek's a mile out. Terrain gets rough, she nodded, then realized he couldn't see her in the dark. I will. They rode in silence. The night air cool against her face. Maggie's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the strangeness of being included, of being needed for something beyond her capacity to be invisible. When they reached Copper Creek, Caleb dismounted in a single fluid motion. Spread out. North Fork, like the lady said. Look for small footprints, broken branches. Signs a child passed through. What if she's wrong? One of the men muttered. Caleb's response was quiet but carried. Then we keep looking until we find him. But I don't think she is. Maggie slid from her horse with far less grace, her legs trembling from the ride. Caleb was there suddenly, his hand under her elbow, steadying her. His touch was brief, impersonal, but she felt the warmth of it through her sleeve. You handled the mayor's wife well back there, he said. Calm logic when everyone else was panicking. I simply observed. Most people don't. They react. He released her arm, moved toward the creek bank. You calculated. Understood the child's mind. I've known many children, Mr. Harlan, and understood them. That's rarer. He was crouched now, studying the ground. Here. Small prints. Recent. The next 20 minutes were tense and focused. They followed the prints along the creek bed, calling the boy's name, lantern light dancing over water and stone. Maggie found herself watching Caleb as much as the terrain, the way he read the land like a language. Patient and thorough, there. One of the men shouted. By the old cottonwood, they found the boy huddled in the roots of a massive tree, cold and frightened but unharmed. He'd twisted his ankle and couldn't walk, had stayed put as darkness fell, crying himself quiet. His mother would be overjoyed. Caleb lifted the child as if he weighed nothing, his face unchanging. But Maggie saw something flicker in those gray eyes, pain, old and deep. A ghost of a boy who would never grow old enough to get lost by a creek. "You're safe now," Caleb told the child. "We're taking you home." The ride back was quieter. The boy slept against Caleb's chest, exhausted by fear and relief. Maggie rode beside them. And in the lantern light, she saw Caleb glance at her once, twice. Each time, his expression was unreadable. When they reached town, the mother's joy was enough to wake the entire street. People emerged from houses, relief and gratitude flowing freely. The boy was swept away into his mother's arms, checked over by the town doctor, declared miraculously unscathed. "You have a gift with children," the mother told Maggie, tears streaming. "You knew, you understood, I only suggested, you saved him." The mother gripped her hands. "Thank you. Thank you." Maggie felt the town's eyes on her again, but different now. Less dismissive. More curious. Caleb Harlan stood apart from the celebration. Already heading toward his horse. Maggie found herself following without quite meaning to. "Mr. Harlan." He paused, turned. In the lamplight from the nearby windows, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. "Thank you for listening," she said. "Back at the meeting." "For taking my suggestion seriously." He studied her with that unsettling directness. "It was a good suggestion. Why wouldn't I listen? Most men don't." "Not to." She gestured vaguely at herself. "To women who think clearly in a crisis." He tilted his head slightly. "Then most men are fools." Something in Maggie's chest loosened. A knot she hadn't realized she was carrying. "You reminded me of something tonight," Caleb said, his voice lower now, almost as if speaking to himself. "What it means to see clearly. To notice what matters." He paused. "I'd forgotten." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "Good night, Miss Fletcher. You know my name. I made it my business to know." He gathered his reins. "Small towns talk. You arrived today. The widow's new companion. Well read, according to Mrs. Pritchard. Steady temperament. From Boston. You asked about me, I observe, Miss Fletcher. Just as you do." He touched the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Ridgeway." Then he was gone, horse and rider disappearing into the darkness beyond the lamplit street. Maggie stood in the dusty road. Feeling something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Not quite hope, she'd learned better than that. But possibility. The strange, unsettling sense that she'd been seen, really seen, not assessed, not categorized, not dismissed. But witnessed. Acknowledged. Considered. The widow found her standing there moments later. "You're wool gathering, girl." "I'm 37, Mrs. Thompson." "Hardly a girl, everyone's a girl compared to me." The widow's sharp eyes glinted. "Interesting evening. The boy is safe. That's what matters." "Yes." "And Caleb Harlan spoke more tonight than he has in 5 years combined." The widow's cane tapped against the wooden walk. "Interesting indeed. I'm sure it means nothing." "I'm sure it means exactly what it appeared to mean. He looked at you, Maggie Fletcher, as if you were present in the world. As if you mattered." The widow started walking toward home. "Come along. Morning comes early, and I'll not have you wool gathering all night." But as Maggie followed, she couldn't shake the memory of those pale gray eyes. The way Caleb Harlan had looked at her, not as decoration, not as convenience, not as invisible spinster aunt, but as a person. Complete and complex and worthy of attention. "He looked at me," she thought, "as though I were present, and in the privacy of her own mind, in the darkness of a frontier town where no one could witness her small rebellion." Maggie Fletcher allowed herself to wonder, just for a moment, What it might mean to be seen by a man like Caleb Harlan. Then she followed the widow home, because wondering changed nothing, and morning would come regardless of her foolish thoughts. But the wondering didn't stop. The wondering became a daily companion, uninvited but persistent. 3 days passed before Maggie saw Caleb Harlan again. 3 days during which she fell into the rhythm of the widow's household, reading aloud from newspaper articles and dime novels, managing correspondence, walking to the mercantile for supplies. 3 days during which she told herself that a single conversation in lamplight meant nothing. Changed nothing. She was fetching thread from Morrison's general store when she heard his voice. "Mrs. Morrison, I need supplies sent to the Circle H, standard order, plus extra lamp oil and writing paper." Maggie stood frozen in the fabric aisle, spool of thread clutched in her hand. Through the gap between calico bolts, she could see him at the counter, hat in hand, that same quiet presence that seemed to alter the very air of a room. "Of course, Mr. Harlan," Mrs. Morrison was saying, her voice carrying the careful respect reserved for important men. "When do you need delivery? End of the week is fine." He paused. "Also, I'm looking for books. Educational texts. Mathematics. Basic science, reading primers, books." Mrs. Morrison sounded surprised. "We don't carry much beyond almanacs and the occasional novel. You'd need to order from Denver, and that takes weeks. What about borrowing?" Another voice cut in, Mrs. Pritchard, ever practical. "The church has some schoolbooks in storage. Miss Fletcher might know where to find them." Maggie's breath caught. "Miss Fletcher." Caleb's tone was carefully neutral, the widow's new companion. "You met her the night of the search." Mrs. Pritchard's voice moved closer. "She's from Boston, been around educated families. Probably knows her way around a library better than anyone in town." Silence. "Then, where might I find her?" "She's here, actually." Mrs. Morrison called out, "Miss Fletcher. Could you come to the counter, dear?" There was no avoiding it. Maggie set down the thread, smoothed her plain gray dress, and stepped into the main area of the store. Caleb turned, and those pale gray eyes found hers immediately. "Miss Fletcher." He nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement that somehow felt more significant than elaborate greetings. "Mr. Harlan." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I'm told you might help me locate educational materials." Yes, possibly. "May I ask what you need them for?" "Ranch hands. 3 of them can't read beyond their own names. 2 can't figure basic accounts." He said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. "Makes them vulnerable. A man who can't read his own contract can be cheated. I won't have that on my land." Maggie felt something shift in her chest. "That's very considerate, it's practical." But something in his eyes suggested more than practicality. Mrs. Pritchard mentioned church storage. "Yes. Father McDonald keeps donated schoolbooks in the cellar. Some are damaged, but many are serviceable." She hesitated. "If you'd like, I could inventory what's available. Make a list of suitable texts, I'd appreciate that." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "Would tomorrow afternoon be convenient? I could meet you at the church." Mrs. Morrison and Mrs. Pritchard exchanged glances. Maggie pretended not to notice. "Tomorrow is fine. 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock." He placed his hat back on his head, touched the brim in farewell. "Ladies," he was gone before Maggie could process what had just happened. She purchased her thread in a daze, aware of the weight of curious stares. "Well," Mrs. Morrison said to no one in particular. "Caleb Harlan asking for help. That's something you don't see every day. He's trying to better his men," Mrs. Pritchard said firmly. "Nothing unusual about that." "No," Mrs. Morrison agreed. "Nothing unusual at all," but her tone suggested she thought otherwise. That evening, the widow was unusually quiet during dinner. When Maggie finally gathered courage to mention the meeting, the old woman's response was swift. "Of course you'll help him. Man's doing something worthwhile. She paused, studying Maggie over her spectacles. But guard your heart, girl, I don't know what you, yes, you do. The widow's voice was gentle but firm. Caleb Harlan is a good man drowning in old grief. He's not looking for comfort, and you're not equipped to provide it even if he were. Help him with his books. Nothing more, I wouldn't presume, that's precisely why you're dangerous to him. You don't presume. Don't expect. Don't demand. The widow set down her fork. A man like that, used to loss, might mistake peace for love. And you, used to being overlooked, might mistake attention for affection. Both of you would be wrong, the words stung because they were true. Maggie nodded, not trusting her voice. That said, the widow continued, no harm in helping. Just remember who you are and what you're here for, who she was. What she was here for. Maggie lay awake that night, those questions circling like vultures. She was 37 years old, plain, past any hope of romance. She was here to be useful, to earn her keep, to live quietly on the margins of other people's lives. Nothing had changed. Nothing would change, but when she arrived at the church the next afternoon, her hands were trembling. Father McDonnell showed her to the cellar, a musty space filled with discarded pews, old hymnals, and crates of forgotten donations. Maggie had just begun sorting through a box of primers when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Caleb had to duck slightly to enter, his frame too large for the low-ceilinged space. He carried a lantern that cast warm light across dust motes and cobwebs. Miss Fletcher, Mr. Harlan. I've made a start, but there's more here than I expected. He set the lantern on a barrel, moved closer to examine the books she'd laid out. This close, she could smell leather and sage, could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into sun and wind. These will do. His voice was quiet in the enclosed space. More than adequate, there are mathematics texts as well. Some geography. A few damaged copies of Shakespeare, not terribly practical, but, take them all, a man who can read should read more than contracts. He picked up a water-stained copy of Hamlet, turned it carefully in his hands. My son loved stories. Before, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. How old was he? Maggie asked softly, 6. Caleb set the book down. Fever took him. His mother 3 days later. Same fever, I'm so sorry, everyone says that. But there was no bitterness in his tone, only exhaustion. They said it 5 years ago. And they'd say it now if I let them. That's why I stopped coming to town. Tired of being the man whose family died, Maggie understood, perhaps better than he knew. When people see you as only one thing, it's hard to be anything else. He looked at her then, really looked. What do people see when they look at you? The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Maggie answered with uncharacteristic honesty. They see a spinster past her prime. Someone useful but unremarkable. Someone who doesn't matter, except in service to others. That's what they see. Caleb's voice was very quiet. What do you see? No one had ever asked her that. In 37 years, no one had cared what she saw when she looked in the mirror. I see someone who's made peace with invisibility, she said finally. Someone who's learned that being useful is enough. Is it? It has to be. Silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Then Caleb reached for another crate, his shoulder brushing hers in the confined space. Neither of them moved away. My ranch is 2 hours north, he said, his attention seemingly focused on the books. Too far for the men to come to town for lessons. Would you consider coming to the Circle H? Once a week, perhaps. I'd pay for your time and provide transportation. Maggie's heart hammered. Mr. Harlan, I don't think you know books. You know teaching. You understood a frightened child's mind in seconds. He straightened, met her eyes. These are grown men who've been ashamed of their ignorance for years. They need someone who won't make them feel small. Someone patient. Someone who sees people clearly. The widow needs me, once a week. Saturday afternoons. I've already spoken to Mrs. Thompson. At Maggie's surprised look, he almost smiled. She called me presumptuous, then said you needed more purpose than reading to an old woman. She said that. She also said you'd make excuses. That I shouldn't let you. He picked up the lantern. Will you come, Miss Fletcher? Not for me. For men who deserve the chance to read their own names in a contract, when he phrased it like that. How could she refuse? Saturday afternoons, she heard herself say. 2 hours of instruction. I'll send the wagon at noon. The first Saturday arrived with unseasonable heat. Maggie dressed in her most practical clothing, a dark blue dress with minimal trim, her hair in a severe bun. She carried a satchel of primers and a slate, her stomach knotted with anxiety. The wagon arrived precisely at noon, driven by a weathered man who introduced himself as Pete, one of the Circle H hands. He was courteous but curious, his eyes assessing her in a way that made her self-conscious. The ride was long and mostly silent. The landscape opened up, endless prairie punctuated by distant mountains. Sky so vast it made her feel microscopic. They passed through land that spoke of careful management, healthy cattle, well-maintained fences, a creek running clear. The Circle H ranch house appeared like a ship on an ocean of grass. It was larger than Maggie expected, built of stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings clustered nearby, bunkhouse, barn, smokehouse, corrals filled with horses. Caleb emerged from the barn as the wagon approached. He'd traded his town clothes for work gear, leather vest, worn trousers, a shirt rolled to his elbows. He looked more at home here, less contained. Miss Fletcher. He helped her down from the wagon. His hand firm and steady. Thank you for coming. Where would you like me to set up? The dining room. I've cleared the table, set out chairs. He gestured toward the house. The men are nervous. Most of them are twice your age and feel foolish learning what children know. Then I'll have to make them feel otherwise. Something shifted in his expression. Approval, perhaps. This way, the house interior was surprising. Clean, well organized, but deeply masculine. No softness, no decoration. Functional furniture, bare walls. A home where someone existed but didn't quite live. 4 men waited in the dining room, all standing, all uncomfortable. They were weathered and work-worn. Hands that had seen decades of hard labor now clasped nervously in front of them. Caleb made introductions. Pete, you've met. This is Tom, Miguel, and Jack. They've agreed to try this for a month. Maggie set down her satchel, looked at each man in turn. Gentlemen, I'm not here to judge what you don't know. I'm here to help you learn what you want to know. We'll start simple and build from there. Everyone learns at their own pace. There's no shame in taking time. Tom, the oldest, spoke up. Ma'am, some of us never had schooling. Not a day of it. Then we'll start with the letters themselves. The sounds they make. How they fit together. She pulled out a slate. By the end of today, you'll each write your full name. Not just recognize it, write it. That's a tall order, Miguel said doubtfully. Is it? Let's find out. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of instruction. Maggie moved between the men, patient and encouraging, breaking down letters into manageable pieces. She didn't condescend, didn't simplify her speech, treated them as capable adults learning a new skill. Caleb stayed in the background, working on ledgers at a smaller table, but she felt his attention. Several times she glanced over to find him watching, not her, but the men's faces as understanding began to dawn. By the end of the session, all 4 men had written their names. Rough, unsteady letters. But readable. The pride in their faces was unmistakable. Next week, Maggie said, we'll work on reading simple words. If you can practice your letters during the week, you'll progress faster. Thank you, Miss Fletcher, Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. Truly, after the men left, Caleb walked her to the porch. The afternoon sun was slanting toward evening, painting the prairie gold. You were good with them, he said. Better than good. They didn't feel diminished, because they're not. They're simply learning. Most teachers wouldn't see it that way. He leaned against the porch rail, and for the first time she saw him truly relaxed. Would you like tea before Pete drives you back? It's a long ride. She should say no. Should maintain proper distance. But the offer was so genuine, so free of ulterior motive, that she found herself nodding. They sat on the porch with tea so strong it could strip paint, watching the sun paint shadows across the land. For a long while, neither spoke. It was comfortable silence, the kind that felt like understanding rather than absence of words. My wife used to sit here, Caleb said finally. Every evening. She'd watch the sunset and plan the next day. She was good at planning. At seeing what needed doing. You must miss her terribly. I miss who I was with her. He stared at the horizon. The man who had purpose beyond work. Who laughed. Who believed in futures, and now I work. I manage land. I make sure my hands are treated fairly. He paused. And I exist. That's not the same as living, but it's what I have. Maggie set down her tea. Mr. Harlan, may I be honest? I'd prefer it. The widow told me to guard my heart. She's afraid I'll mistake your attention for something it isn't. The words felt dangerous, but necessary. I want you to know I understand the difference. You're looking for someone steady. Someone who doesn't demand. I can be that. I can help your men, and I can exist near you without expectation. But I need you to be clear about what this is. Caleb turned to look at her fully. And the intensity in those gray eyes made her breath catch. I don't know what this is, Miss Fletcher, he said quietly. I know that for 5 years, I haven't wanted anyone's company. Haven't sought conversation beyond necessity. Haven't felt anything beyond duty and exhaustion. He paused. And then you spoke in that town meeting with such calm clarity, and I realized I'd been asleep. Not dead, but not alive either. Asleep, I don't understand, neither do I. He straightened, ran a hand through his hair. All I know is that sitting here with you, drinking bad tea and watching the sun set, I feel present. In the world. In my own life. I don't know what to call that. Maggie's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. It sounds like loneliness finding company, maybe. Or maybe it's two people who understand what it means to be invisible deciding to see each other. He picked up his cup, drained it. I won't lie to you and say I'm looking for love. I'm not. I had that, and it died. But I'm looking for something. Peace, maybe. The sense that existing might someday turn back into living, and you think I can provide that. I think you already do. Just by being exactly who you are. He stood, offered his hand. Pete's waiting. I'll see you next Saturday. Maggie took his hand, let him help her stand. His palm was warm, calloused, and holding it felt like the most reckless thing she'd ever done. Next Saturday, she agreed. The ride back to town was quiet, but Maggie's mind was chaos. She replayed every word, every glance, trying to understand what had just happened. Caleb Harlan had essentially told her he wasn't offering romance, but what he was offering felt somehow more dangerous. More real. The widow was waiting when she arrived home, eyes sharp behind her spectacles. Well, I taught 4 men to write their names, and nothing. It was a teaching session. Maggie Fletcher, I may be old, but I'm not blind. The widow tapped her cane. That man looked at you 3 times in 1 week before this teaching business began. Caleb Harlan, who hasn't looked at anyone in 5 years. Don't tell me nothing is happening, he's lonely. I'm convenient. That's all. Is that what you believe? Maggie sat down heavily. I don't know what to believe. He says he feels present when I'm near. That I make existence feel less empty. But he also says he's not looking for love, and you? What are you looking for? The question landed like a stone in still water. What was she looking for? She'd convinced herself that being useful was enough, that invisibility was acceptable, that love was for women who deserved it, younger, prettier, more worthy women. But sitting on that porch, drinking terrible tea, feeling Caleb's attention like sunlight after years of shadow, she'd felt alive. Actually, genuinely alive. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what I'm allowed to want. The widow's expression softened. Oh, child. We're always allowed to want. It's the having that's complicated. She reached over, patted Maggie's hand. Just remember, a man who makes you feel present is a gift. But a man who can only make you feel present, who can't or won't offer more, is a beautiful torture. Guard your heart. Not against him, but against the hope that presence might become permanence. That night, Maggie lay awake, the widow's words echoing. She should stop this before it went further. Should tell Caleb she couldn't continue the lessons. Should protect herself against inevitable disappointment. But when Saturday came again, she was ready at noon, satchel in hand, heart pounding with something that felt dangerously like anticipation, and when Caleb met her at the ranch with a smile that reached his eyes, the first real smile she'd seen from him, she knew it was already too late for guarding anything. She was present in his world. And he was becoming present in hers. Whether that was enough or far too much, only time would tell. The Saturdays accumulated like coins in a jar, each one precious and dangerous in equal measure. By the 5th week, the ranch hands were reading simple sentences. By the 8th, Tom had written a letter to his sister in Missouri, the first correspondence he'd ever penned himself. Miguel was working through a dime novel with fierce concentration, lips moving as he sounded out words. Jack had started keeping a journal, entries brief but proud. Maggie watched their progress with satisfaction that went bone deep. This was purpose she could hold on to, proof that her presence mattered beyond simply being useful furniture in someone else's life. But it was the time after lessons that had become both gift and torment. Each week, Caleb would offer tea on the porch. Each week, she would accept, telling herself it was merely politeness. And each week, they would sit as the sun declined, talking about things that mattered and things that didn't, building something she couldn't quite name. Tell me about Boston, he said one afternoon in late October, the air sharp with coming winter. Maggie wrapped her hands around her cup. What do you want to know? Why you left? She'd known the question would come eventually. The families I worked for were kind. The children grew fond of me. But I was always watching life happen to other people. Births, weddings, achievements. I attended them all, celebrated them all, but I was never the subject of celebration. Only the witness. That sounds lonely. It was comfortable. There's a difference. She paused, choosing words carefully. The last family I worked for, the eldest daughter got married last spring. Beautiful wedding, hundreds of guests. I helped her dress, fixed her veil, held her hand while she cried happy tears. And when she walked down the aisle, I stood in the back of the church with the other servants and watched. Later, at the reception, her mother thanked me for my years of service. Said I'd been like family, but you weren't family, no. I was the woman who made family possible for others. And I realized I'd spent 20 years doing that, and I'd spend the next 20 the same way unless I changed something. She met his eyes. So I came west, where no one knew me, where I could be invisible without the constant reminder of everything I wasn't. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. You're not invisible to me, I know. The admission felt dangerous. That's what frightens me. Why? Because I'm 37 years old, and I've never been seen before. Not really. And now you look at me and I feel, she stopped, appalled at what she'd almost revealed. You feel what? His voice was gentle but insistent. Present, she whispered. Real. As though I exist beyond function and service. It's intoxicating and terrifying because I know it can't last. Why can't it? Because men like you don't. She gestured helplessly at herself. Women like me, we're not the ones who get chosen. We're the ones who help other women prepare for being chosen. That's the natural order. Caleb set down his cup with deliberate care. The natural order put my wife and son in the ground and left me alive. The natural order is brutal and senseless, Miss Fletcher. I stopped believing in it 5 years ago. The rawness in his voice made her chest ache. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. But you're wrong about what men like me see. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Do you know what I noticed first about you? Not that night at the meeting, before that. You were walking to the mercantile. It was your second day in town. You stopped to help Mrs. Chen with her packages. She's Chinese, and most people won't even look at her directly. But you didn't hesitate. Didn't perform charity, just helped as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Maggie blinked. You saw that? I see a lot. Spent 5 years watching this town from the outside. You help without expectation. You notice people others overlook. You're patient with men twice your age learning to read, and you never make them feel less than. He paused. That's not invisible, Maggie. That's rare. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his low, measured voice did something to her composure. Caleb, she said, testing his name on her tongue. What are we doing here? I don't know. His honesty was stark. But I know I haven't felt this alive in 5 years. And I know that frightens both of us for different reasons. Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted. A rider appeared over the rise, young, riding hard. He pulled up at the porch, breathless. Mr. Harlan, sir. Tom's been hurt. Fence wire snapped, caught him across the chest. Doc's at the bunkhouse now. Caleb was on his feet instantly. How bad? Bad enough. He's asking for you. They ran. Maggie gathered her skirts and followed, propriety forgotten in the face of emergency. The bunkhouse was chaos. Men crowded around a cot where Tom lay. His shirt cut away, a vicious gash across his ribs wrapped in blood-stained bandages. The doctor looked up as Caleb entered. He'll live, but he needs stitches. Problem is, he won't stay still. Keeps trying to get up. I can't miss work, Tom rasped. Can't afford, you're on my payroll whether you're working or not, Caleb said firmly. Doc, what do you need? Someone to keep him calm. He's agitated, fighting the pain. Maggie moved forward without thinking. Tom, look at me. The injured man's eyes found hers, wild with pain and fear. Remember the first day I came here? She kept her voice steady, calm. You told me you'd never learned a single day of school. Remember what happened by the end of that lesson? I wrote my name, you wrote your name. And the next week, you read your first sentence. And last week, you wrote to your sister. You told me you never thought you'd be able to do that. She took his hand, held it firmly. You've done impossible things already, Tom. Lying still while the doctor helps you. That's nothing compared to what you've already accomplished. Tom's breathing slowed slightly. It hurts, I know. But pain is temporary. You know what lasts? The letter to your sister. The words you can read now. The person you're becoming. She squeezed his hand. Stay with me, Tom. Count with me. 1, 2, 3, she kept counting, kept her voice low and rhythmic. While the doctor worked. Tom gripped her hand hard enough to bruise, but he stayed still. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching, his expression unreadable. 20 minutes later, Tom was stitched and bandaged, sleeping under the influence of laudanum. "You're a natural," the doctor said, packing his bag. "Ever considered nursing?" "I've considered being useful," Maggie said. "Nursing is just another form of that." Outside, the sun was setting. Maggie realized with a start that she'd missed the wagon back to town. "Pete's already left," Caleb said, reading her thoughts. "I'll drive you back myself. Let me harness the buggy." The ride to town was quiet at first, the buggy rolling through darkness broken only by lantern light. Maggie was acutely aware of Caleb beside her, the warmth of his shoulder inches from hers. "Thank you," he said finally. "For Tom. You didn't have to do that." "Of course I did. He was frightened and in pain. Most people would have stayed back. Let the doctor handle it. Most people aren't used to being the steady presence in a room." She pulled her shawl tighter against the cold. "It's what I'm good at, Caleb. Being the calm in someone else's storm. Is that all you think you're good at?" The question hung in the air between them. Maggie didn't answer because she didn't know how to, and they rode in silence until the lights of Ridgeway appeared ahead. Caleb pulled the buggy to a stop 3 houses from the widow's place. Properly distant from direct observation but close enough for propriety. He turned to her, and in the dim light, his face was all shadows and sharp planes. "Maggie, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered. "All right." My wife's name was Sarah. She was beautiful, vivacious, full of laughter. Everyone loved her. When she died, people told me I'd been lucky to have had her at all, that some men never get that kind of love. He paused. And they were right. I was lucky. But it's been 5 years, and I'm tired of being the man defined by loss. Tired of being half alive in honor of the dead. "Caleb, let me finish." His voice was rough. "You asked what we're doing here. I think we're both trying to remember how to be fully alive. You've spent 20 years being invisible, and I've spent 5 years being absent. And somehow, when we're together, we both become present." "That's not love," Maggie said, even as her heart cracked at the words. "No. It's not." His honesty was brutal and kind at once. "But it's something. And I'm tired of pretending I don't feel it." "What do you feel?" He reached out, took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, and holding it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. "I feel like I can breathe when you're near. Like the world has color again instead of just shades of gray. Like maybe, possibly, I could be something other than a man going through motions." Tears pricked at Maggie's eyes. "And when you stop feeling that? When the novelty of my company wears off and you remember I'm just a plain spinster who teaches men to read, then I'll still want you there." His grip tightened. "Because you see me, Maggie. Not the man I was, not the tragic widower, but the man I am right now. And I see you. Not invisible, not useful furniture, but Maggie Fletcher, who has more courage in her little finger than most people manage in a lifetime." "Caleb, I can't." Her voice broke. "I can't be a placeholder. Can't be the woman who makes you feel alive until you're ready for someone who deserves you. You think you don't deserve me?" He sounded genuinely baffled. "Maggie, I'm a broken man living in an empty house, going through motions. You're the first thing in 5 years that's made me want more than survival. If anyone doesn't deserve anyone, it's me not deserving you." The tears fell then, hot against her cold cheeks. "The widow warned me this would happen. That you'd make me feel present and I'd mistake it for more. Is she right? Are you mistaking it?" "I don't know." The admission burst from her. "I don't know because no one has ever looked at me the way you do. No one has ever made me feel like I matter beyond what I can do for them. So maybe I am mistaking comfort for love, presence for permanence. Or maybe," she stopped, terrified to continue. "Maybe what? Maybe I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. And that terrifies me because you're not falling in love with me. You're just learning to live again, and I'm convenient. And one day you'll be fully alive and you'll look around and wonder why you settled for someone like me when you could have." He kissed her. It wasn't dramatic or passionate. It was gentle, tentative, as though he was asking a question he didn't know how to put into words. His lips were warm against hers, and he tasted like coffee and something indefinably him. The kiss lasted only seconds before he pulled back, but those seconds rearranged everything Maggie thought she knew about herself. "I'm not settled," he said quietly. "And you're not convenient. You're necessary. To my breathing. To my believing life might be worth fully living again." He touched her face, his thumb brushing away tears. "I can't promise you love, Maggie. I don't know if I'm capable of it anymore. But I can promise you truth. And the truth is, I need you. Not your usefulness, not your steadiness. You. The woman who stops to help strangers, who makes frightened men feel brave, who sees invisible people because you know what invisible feels like." Maggie was shaking. "That's not enough, I know." His hand dropped. "And I have no right to ask you to accept it. But I'm asking anyway, because I'm selfish and desperate and you're the only person who makes me feel human." They sat in the darkness, the moment stretching between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Finally, Maggie spoke. "I need time. To think. To understand what I'm agreeing to. Take all the time you need." He helped her down from the buggy, his hand lingering on hers. "But Maggie, whatever you decide, thank you. For these weeks. For making me remember what it feels like to be alive." She walked to the widow's door in a daze, turned back once to see him still standing by the buggy, watching. Not with desire or need, but with something that looked dangerously like hope. Inside, the widow was waiting, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "He kissed you. It wasn't a question." Maggie nodded, unable to speak, and I don't know what to do." She sank into a chair. "He says he needs me. Not loves me, needs me. To feel alive. To be present in the world. Is that enough? Can I build a life on being someone's path back to living?" The widow was quiet for a long time. "What does your heart say?" "My heart says yes. Take whatever he's offering because it's more than anyone else has ever offered. But my head says I'll destroy myself trying to be enough for a man who's still in love with a ghost." "He told you he's not in love with you. He said he doesn't know if he can love anymore." The widow tapped her cane thoughtfully. "That's honest, at least. Brutal, but honest. The question is whether you can live with honest instead of romantic. Whether being necessary is enough when you want to be cherished. I don't know." "Then figure it out, child. Because that man is standing at a crossroads, and you're the signpost. Whichever way you point him, he'll go. But you'll have to live with the direction you choose." That night, Maggie lay awake, replaying the kiss, the conversation, the weight of Caleb's admission. He needed her. Found her necessary. Saw her when no one else did, but he didn't love her, couldn't promise he ever would, and she had to decide if being seen was enough, or if she deserved more than being the woman who helped a broken man remember how to live. The question haunted her through the darkness, and when dawn came, she still had no answer. She avoided him for 2 weeks. It wasn't difficult. She simply sent word through Pete that she'd fallen ill, that the lessons would need to pause. The widow raised an eyebrow but said nothing, and Maggie spent those 14 days reading to the old woman, walking to the mercantile, existing in the careful invisibility she'd once found comfortable, except it no longer fit. Like a dress she'd outgrown, the old patterns of her life chafed and constricted. She'd tasted being seen, and going back to transparent felt like suffocation. On the 15th day, Caleb came to town. Maggie was returning from the post office when she saw him outside Morrison's general store, talking with the mayor. He stood with that same quiet presence that altered space around him, hat in hand, listening with the focused attention he gave everything. She tried to slip past, but his eyes found hers across the dusty street. He didn't approach. Simply looked at her with an expression that made her chest ache, patient, questioning, sad. Then he turned back to the mayor, and Maggie fled to the widow's house with her heart in her throat. "You can't hide from him forever," the widow said that evening. "I'm not hiding. I'm thinking, you're afraid." The old woman's voice was surprisingly gentle. "And I understand why. But hiding won't make the question go away, child. It'll only make the answer harder to live with, whichever way you choose." That night, Maggie lay awake and forced herself to be brutally honest. She was 37 years old. This might be her only chance at something resembling partnership, companionship, a life that mattered beyond service to others. Caleb offered presence, respect, genuine need. He saw her, valued her, wanted her in his life. He just didn't love her. Could she live with that? Build a life on being necessary instead of cherished? Be the woman who helped him heal, knowing he might never feel for her what he'd felt for his dead wife? The question gnawed at her through the darkness until dawn broke gray and cold. She made her decision in the pale morning light. She would go back to the ranch, continue the lessons, and maintain careful distance. She would be his teacher, perhaps his friend, but she would guard what remained of her heart. It was the sensible choice. The safe choice, the choice that felt like dying by inches. Saturday arrived with freezing rain. Maggie dressed in her plainest dress, armored herself in severity, and waited for Pete's wagon. When it didn't come by noon, she felt equal parts relief and disappointment. Then the knock came at the door. The widow answered it, and Maggie heard Caleb's voice, low and respectful. "Mrs. Thompson, I apologize for calling unannounced. I came to speak with Miss Fletcher. She's been ill," the widow said, her tone sharp. "I know. That's why I've stayed away. But the weather's turning worse, and I wanted to make sure she was well. And to say..." He paused. "To say I'm sorry if I've made things difficult." Maggie appeared in the doorway before she could stop herself. Caleb looked tired, his face drawn, rain dripping from his hat. Their eyes met, and the 2 weeks of distance collapsed like a house of cards. "I'm well," she said. "Thank you for asking. The men miss you. Tom's been practicing his reading every night. He wanted me to tell you he finished the novel." That's wonderful." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. The widow cleared her throat meaningfully. "I'll be in the parlor. Miss Fletcher, you may speak with Mr. Harlan on the porch." Properly, the porch was cold and damp, rain creating a curtain of gray around them. Caleb stood at the railing, not looking at her. "I shouldn't have kissed you," he said finally. "It was presumptuous and unfair. You asked for time to think, and I pushed before you were ready." "You were honest," Maggie said. "Brutally so. But honesty isn't always kind." He turned to face her. "Maggie, I've spent 2 weeks trying to figure out how to make this right. How to take back what I said, how to let you go without making you feel obligated. But I can't. Because it was all true. I do need you. You do make me feel alive. And I can't promise you love because I don't know if I'm capable of it anymore. I know, but here's what I didn't say, what I should have said." He took a step closer. "I'm terrified of needing you. Terrified because needing someone means they can be lost. And I've lost everyone I've ever needed. My son. My wife. Even my parents, years ago. Everyone I've loved has been taken, and I survived by not loving anymore. By not needing. By being half alive because being fully alive meant risking that kind of loss again." Maggie's throat tightened. "And now you've made me need again. Made me want to be fully alive. And it terrifies me because I know what comes after need." His voice roughened. "It terrifies me because I'm starting to care for you in ways I swore I never would again. And I don't know if that's fair to you, to be cared for by a man who's afraid of what caring becomes. What does caring become? Love. The word fell between them like a stone. And love means loss. It always does. The only question is whether the living is worth the inevitable losing. Maggie's hands were shaking. And is it? For me, I don't know. His honesty cut like a blade. But I want to find out. If you'll let me. Before she could answer, Mrs. Morrison came hurrying up the street, skirts hiked against the mud. Her face flushed with urgency. Miss Fletcher. Oh, thank heavens. We need you at the school right away. The school. What's happened? Jenny Cartwright, you know, the blacksmith's youngest, she's having some kind of episode. Won't stop crying, won't speak, just rocks back and forth. Her mother's frantic. Mrs. Pritchard said you're good with frightened children, and we don't know what else to do. Maggie didn't hesitate. Take me there, I'll drive you, Caleb said immediately. The schoolhouse was chaos when they arrived. Jenny sat in a corner, 7 years old and small for her age, keening with a sound that raised every hair on Maggie's neck. Her mother knelt beside her, weeping. Mrs. Pritchard and 2 other women stood helplessly nearby. Maggie took in the scene in seconds, saw the ripped dress, the terror in the child's eyes, and understood with sickening clarity what had happened. Everyone out, she said quietly. Now, but my daughter needs space. Please. Trust me. Mrs. Cartwright looked at Mrs. Pritchard, who nodded. Slowly, reluctantly, they filed out. Caleb started to follow, but Maggie caught his arm. Stay. By the door. She needs to see a man who's safe. Who won't hurt her. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by rage so pure and cold it was almost visible. Who? I don't know yet. But she needs to feel safe before she can tell us. Maggie approached the child slowly, carefully, making herself small and unthreatening. She sat on the floor several feet away, not speaking, just being present. Minutes passed. The child's keening slowly quieted to whimpers. Jenny, Maggie said softly. My name is Maggie. I'm not going to touch you or come closer unless you want me to. I'm just going to sit here, and you can sit there, and we'll breathe together. Can you do that? The child's eyes flickered to her, animal wild with fear. Breathing is good, Maggie continued in that same gentle voice. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Like this. She demonstrated, slow and steady. Gradually, the child's breathing began to match hers. 5 minutes became 10. The rigid terror in Jenny's small body began to ease fractionally. There's a man by the door, Maggie said carefully. His name is Mr. Harlan. He's very tall and probably a little scary looking. But he's safe. He has kind eyes, and he's not going to come close. He's just there to make sure no one bothers us while we breathe together. Is that all right? Jenny's eyes moved to Caleb, who stood absolutely still, his face carefully neutral. After a long moment, she nodded. Good. That's very good, Jenny. Maggie shifted slightly. Something scary happened to you today. Something that hurt you and frightened you. And your body is remembering how to feel safe again. That takes time. There's no rush. Another nod, this one less hesitant. The person who hurt you, Maggie said, her voice still gentle but threaded with steel. Was it someone you know? A long pause. Then the smallest nod. Someone your mama knows. Another nod. Caleb made a sound low in his throat, quickly suppressed. Maggie didn't look at him, kept her entire focus on the child. You're very brave, Jenny. Braver than you know. She paused. The person who hurt you, was it Mr. Brennan? William Brennan was the assistant schoolteacher, a newcomer from back east who'd arrived 3 months ago with impeccable references and a charming smile. Jenny's reaction was immediate and visceral. She curled into herself, the whimpering starting again. All right. All right, sweetheart. Maggie kept her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. He's not here. He can't hurt you. You're safe. She looked at Caleb. Get the sheriff. Now. And find out where Brennan is. Caleb was gone in seconds. Maggie stayed with Jenny, talking quietly about nothing and everything, rebuilding trust word by careful word. By the time the sheriff arrived with Mrs. Cartwright, the child was calm enough to point to where Brennan had hurt her, to nod when asked if he'd threatened her if she told. The sheriff's face was grim. William Brennan left town this afternoon on the eastbound stage. But we've sent a wire. He won't get far. Mrs. Cartwright swept her daughter into her arms, weeping. Thank you, Miss Fletcher. Thank you. If you hadn't understood, any woman would have understood, Maggie said quietly. But she knew it wasn't true. Many women would have missed the signs, dismissed the child's distress as hysteria or misbehavior. Outside, the rain had stopped. Caleb stood by his buggy, his face terrible in its stillness. When Maggie emerged, he looked at her with something that might have been awe. How did you know? I've seen it before. Not often, thank heavens, but enough to recognize the signs. She felt suddenly, desperately tired. In Boston. One of the families I worked for. The uncle. I reported it, and no one believed me. Said I was a hysterical spinster imagining things. They dismissed me, and the child. She stopped, unable to continue. What happened to the child, I don't know. I was sent away. But I've always wondered. Always hoped someone eventually listened. Tears burned her eyes. At least here, they believed. At least Jenny will be safe. Caleb's hand found hers, his grip almost painful in its intensity. You saved that child. You understood when no one else did. You were brave enough to name the truth when it would have been easier to look away. Any decent person would have, no. His voice was fierce. Most people don't want to see that kind of evil. Don't want to believe it exists in their town, in people they know. But you looked directly at it and protected that child anyway. He pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face. You're extraordinary, Maggie Fletcher. And I've been a fool. What? I told you I couldn't promise love. That I didn't know if I was capable of it. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. But I've been lying to myself. I'm already in love with you. I have been for weeks, maybe since that first night when you understood a lost boy's mind. I've just been too afraid to admit it. Maggie's breath caught. Caleb, I love your courage. Your compassion. The way you see invisible people because you know what invisible feels like. I love how you make frightened men feel brave and teach them to read as though it's the most natural thing in the world. I love that you're steady when everyone else panics, and I love that you're brave enough to name evil when you see it. His voice roughened. I love you, Maggie. Not because you make me feel alive, though you do. Not because I need you, though I do. But because you're you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. You said, I know what I said. I was wrong. Or maybe I was right, and this is what caring becomes when you stop being afraid of it. He leaned his forehead against hers. I'm still terrified. Terrified of loss, of grief, of all the ways loving someone can hurt. But I'm more terrified of losing you by being too afraid to love you. Maggie was crying now, tears she couldn't control. I'm not Sarah. I'll never be beautiful or vivacious or, I don't want Sarah. I want you. He pulled back to look at her. I loved Sarah with everything I had. But she's gone, and I survived, and you've taught me that surviving isn't the same as living. You've taught me to live again, Maggie. And I want to live with you. Build something new with you. Not as a replacement for what I lost, but as something completely different. Something real and present in ours. I'm afraid, she whispered, so am I. But maybe we can be afraid together. she kissed him then. Rising on her toes to press her lips to his, tasting rain and salt and possibility. This kiss was different from the first, deeper, more certain, claiming and being claimed in equal measure. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Caleb smiled. It was a real smile, reaching his eyes, transforming his face from handsome to beautiful. "Marry me," he said. "What, marry me?" "Not because it's practical or sensible or because we're both lonely. Marry me because I love you and I want to spend whatever years I have left making sure you never feel invisible again." "Caleb, it's too fast, is it? We're not children, Maggie. We know what we want. I know what I want. It's you. Always you." He took her hands. "I'm not asking you to say yes right now. I'm asking you to consider it. To imagine a life where you're not in service to someone else's family but building your own. Where you're not witnessing other people's happiness but creating your own." Maggie looked at their joined hands, his calloused and large, hers trembling and small. She thought about the widow's warning, about guarding her heart, about the danger of mistaking presence for permanence, but this wasn't presence. This was love, messy and imperfect and terrifying, but real. He loved her. Not her usefulness, not her steadiness, but her. Maggie Fletcher, 37 years old, plain as prairie grass. Invisible to almost everyone, but not to him, never to him. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." His kiss was answer and promise and the beginning of something new. Around them, the town would talk. People would wonder what a man like Caleb Harlan saw in a woman like Maggie Fletcher. They'd question and gossip and never quite understand, but for the first time in her life, Maggie didn't care what people saw when they looked at her. Because the only person whose gaze mattered was looking at her like she was miraculous, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe it. The town, as expected, had opinions, within an hour of their return to the widow's house. 3 neighbors had found reasons to visit. By evening, half of Ridgeway knew that Caleb Harlan had proposed to the widow's plain companion, and speculation ran like wildfire through saloons and sitting rooms alike. "He's lost his mind with grief," Mrs. Morrison whispered to her husband, though not quietly enough. "Maybe he needs a housekeeper and figured marriage was cheaper," someone else suggested. "Poor man. Sarah was such a beauty, and now he's settling for, well." The widow heard it all and reported it to Maggie with grim satisfaction. "Let them talk. They'll find something new to cluck about within a week." But Maggie heard the whispers when she walked to the mercantile. Saw the pitying glances from women who couldn't understand why a man like Caleb would choose someone like her. Part of her, the part that had spent 37 years being overlooked, wanted to explain, to justify, to make them understand. The newer part of her, the part that was learning to be seen, simply lifted her chin and kept walking. Caleb came to town 3 days later with a ring, simple gold, no adornments, practical and beautiful in its plainness. He slipped it on her finger in the widow's parlor with the old woman as witness, and Maggie felt the weight of it like an anchor and a promise combined. 2 weeks, he said. "I want to marry you in 2 weeks. Unless you need more time." 2 weeks is perfect, no fancy wedding, the widow interjected. The girl doesn't need half the town gawking at her like she's a circus curiosity. Small ceremony, people who matter, then get on with your lives, so it was decided. Father McDonnell would officiate. The ranch hands would attend, along with the widow, Mrs. Pritchard, and a handful of others who'd shown genuine kindness. No reception, no elaborate dress, no performance for people whose opinions held no weight. The night before the wedding, Maggie couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, looking out at the dark street, trying to comprehend how her life had transformed in mere months. From invisible spinster to bride. From witness to participant. From existing to living, having second thoughts. The widow's voice came from the doorway, "No. Just, overwhelmed." The old woman shuffled in, settled into the chair by the window. "I was wrong about him, you know. Told you to guard your heart, that he was just learning to live again and you'd be convenient. But I watched him these past weeks. The way he looks at you. She paused. That's not convenience, child. That's devotion. Do you think I'm making a mistake? I think you're taking the bravest risk of your life. Marriage always is, even under the best circumstances. The widow reached over, patted Maggie's hand. But if you're going to risk your heart, better to risk it on a man who sees you clearly than one who sees only what he wants you to be. I'm afraid I won't be enough. Enough for whom? Him. He chose you. The town. They don't matter. Yourself. The widow's grip tightened. That's the real fear, isn't it? That you'll wake up one day and still see what you've always seen in the mirror, invisible, unremarkable, unworthy of love. Maggie's throat closed. Let me tell you something, Maggie Fletcher. I've lived 86 years. Buried 2 husbands, raised 4 children, and watched this town grow from nothing to something. And in all that time, I've learned one truth: worthiness isn't something you earn. It's something you accept. Caleb has offered you his love. The only question is whether you'll believe you deserve it. What if I can't? Then you practice. Every day, you practice believing until it becomes true. The widow stood, creaking joints protesting. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you're getting married, and I'll not have you looking hollow-eyed at your own wedding, but sleep wouldn't come. Maggie lay awake, the widow's words circling through her mind, until dawn painted the sky pale gold. The wedding was at noon in the small church, sunlight streaming through the simple windows. Maggie wore a new dress, deep blue, well-made but not extravagant, with lace at the collar that the widow had insisted on. Her hair was pinned up, soft at the temples, and when she looked in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself, not because she looked different, but because for the first time, she looked present. Real. Here, the church was nearly empty, just as they'd wanted. Tom, Miguel, Jack, and Pete sat in the front pew, dressed in their Sunday best, looking proud and uncomfortable in equal measure. Mrs. Pritchard was there, surprisingly emotional. The widow sat in her usual spot, cane across her lap, watching everything with sharp eyes, and Caleb stood at the altar, waiting. He wore a dark suit, hair combed back, and when Maggie entered on the widow's arm, his face transformed. Not with polite appreciation or dutiful affection, but with something so raw and real it made her stumble slightly: love. He looked at her with love. The widow delivered her to Caleb's side, pressed her hand into his, and whispered, "Be happy, both of you. You've earned it." Father McDonnell began the ceremony, his voice warm and familiar. Maggie heard the words, promises and vows, forever and commitment, but she was focused on Caleb's face, on the way his hand trembled slightly in hers, on the emotion shining in those pale gray eyes. "Do you, Caleb Harlan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was steady, sure. "And do you, Margaret Fletcher, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She thought about all the years of invisibility. All the weddings she'd attended from the margins. All the time she'd believed this moment would never be hers. "I do." The kiss was gentle, reverent, and when they pulled apart, Caleb whispered against her forehead, "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For letting me see you. For being brave enough to love me back." The reception, such as it was, happened on the church steps. The ranch hands shook Caleb's hand with gruff affection and told Maggie she'd made an honest man of their boss. Mrs. Pritchard wept openly, surprising everyone. The widow declared it the most sensible wedding she'd attended in 50 years, and then they were riding to the Circle H in the buggy. The afternoon sun warm on their faces. "Married? Actually married, nervous?" Caleb asked as the ranch came into view. "Terrified," Maggie admitted. "I've never. I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to be a husband anymore." "Not really." He glanced at her. "We'll figure it out together." The house looked different somehow, less empty, more welcoming. Caleb carried her over the threshold despite her protests about her weight, and set her down gently in the main room. "I should warn you," he said. "The men did something. I told them not to, but they insisted." "What did they do?" He led her to the dining room. The table was set with wildflowers in mason jars, and laid out were dishes of food, simple but abundant. On each plate was a handwritten note. Tom said, "Thank you for teaching me to write this. You changed my life, Miguel's. A good woman deserves a good meal. Be happy, Maestra, Jax, you made the boss smile again. That's worth more than gold, Pete's. Welcome home, Mrs. Harlan." Maggie's eyes burned with tears. "They did this, they wanted you to know you're not just tolerated here. You're wanted." Caleb pulled out a chair for her. "We all want you here, Maggie. This is your home now. Not because you married me, but because you belong here." They ate the meal the ranch hands had prepared, talking about small things and large things, plans for the future and memories of the past. Caleb told her about his childhood on this land, about building the ranch with his father, about the dreams he'd had before loss taught him to stop dreaming. "And now?" Maggie asked. "Do you dream again?" "Yes." He reached across the table, took her hand. "I dream about growing old with you. About watching the seasons change from that porch. About reading books together by the fire in winter. Simple dreams, maybe, but they're mine again." Ours. As evening fell, they sat on the porch, the same porch where they'd shared so many conversations. So much careful circling toward this moment. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, painted gold and crimson by the setting sun. "Sarah used to sit here," Caleb said quietly. "I told you that once." Maggie tensed, but he squeezed her hand. "I'm not comparing. I'm remembering." He turned to look at her. "I loved Sarah with the passion of a young man who thought love was invincible. And when she died, I thought I died too. But I didn't. I survived. And you taught me that surviving could become living again." He paused. "This love, what I feel for you, it's different. Deeper, maybe. More aware of how precious and fragile it is. I love you knowing that life is uncertain, that loss is inevitable. And I choose to love you anyway. That's not less than what I felt before. It's more. Because it's deliberate. Conscious. Brave." Maggie leaned her head against his shoulder, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I spent my whole life believing I wasn't the kind of woman who got chosen. That love was for other people, prettier people, younger people, people who deserved it, and now I'm choosing to believe you. To believe I deserve this. That we both do." She lifted her head, met his eyes. "It's hard. Some mornings I'll probably wake up and wonder why you're still here. Why you haven't realized you made a mistake, then on those mornings, I'll remind you." His voice was fierce. "Every day if I have to. Until you believe it all the way through." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. Inside the house, lamps burned warm against the night. Tomorrow, they begin the daily work of building a life together, managing the ranch, continuing the reading lessons, creating routines and rituals that would become their own. But tonight, they simply existed together, two people who'd been invisible in different ways finding visibility in each other's eyes. "Maggie," Caleb said as the moon rose, "Yes, I'm glad you came to Ridgeway. Glad you were brave enough to leave Boston, to start over, to believe you deserved more than being useful. I'm glad you came to that town meeting. Glad you were brave enough to live again." He stood, offered his hand. "Come on. It's getting cold." Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Their house now. Their home. Maggie looked around at the bare walls, the masculine furniture, the spaces that needed a woman's touch. "I'd like to make some changes," she said tentatively. "Not to erase what was here, but to make it ours. Change whatever you want." This is your home, Maggie. Make it feel like one." Over the next weeks and months, she did exactly that. She added curtains to windows, books to shelves, color to rooms that had known only functionality. The ranch hands visited more often. Comfortable now with a woman's presence. Tom finished 3 novels and started writing letters to a woman in Kansas he'd met through correspondence. Miguel taught her Spanish phrases while she taught him complex grammar. Jack's journal grew thicker, filled with thoughts he'd never known he could express, and every Saturday, more men from neighboring ranches began appearing, asking quietly if the reading lessons might expand. Maggie's kitchen table became a classroom, her patience legendary, her methods effective. Word spread about the woman who taught grown men without shame, who saw people clearly and helped them see themselves. The town's opinions shifted slowly. People began to understand that Caleb hadn't settled or made a mistake. He'd simply seen something they'd missed, that Maggie Fletcher was exactly the kind of woman a man built a life with, not in spite of her plainness but because of the extraordinary person it had always hidden. One evening in late spring, nearly a year after their wedding, Maggie stood on the porch watching Caleb work with a difficult horse in the corral. The widow had passed peacefully in her sleep 2 months prior, leaving Maggie a small inheritance and a letter that simply said, "I told you so." "Be happy." Caleb finished with the horse and walked toward the house, his gait easy, his face relaxed in a way that still sometimes surprised her. He climbed the porch steps, dropped a kiss on her hair, and settled into the chair beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different my life is from what I expected. Better or worse?" "Infinitely better." She turned to look at him, this man who'd chosen her, who loved her, who saw her every single day. "I used to think happiness was for other people. That I'd spend my life watching others live while I simply existed. But you taught me I was wrong, you taught yourself." "I just provided the mirror." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over their land, their home, their life. Inside, dinner waited. Tomorrow, more students would arrive seeking literacy and dignity. Next week, they'd ride to town together for supplies and endure the stares of people who still couldn't quite understand what they saw. But none of that mattered. Because Maggie Fletcher Harlan had learned the most important lesson of all, that being seen by the right person was worth a lifetime of being invisible to everyone else, and Caleb, watching his wife's face in the fading light, felt the last remnants of old grief release their hold. He'd loved deeply and lost terribly, and somehow survived to love again, differently, but no less completely. Sarah would always be part of his past, but Maggie was his present and his future. "I love you," he said, because the words never got old, never lost their power. "I love you too," she replied, because she finally believed she deserved to say them, and in that moment. On that porch, with the prairie stretching endlessly before them and their whole lives still to live, they were exactly where they belonged, together. Seen. Chosen. Home. The end came quietly, as the best endings do, not with drama or fanfare, but with the simple, profound realization that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories are the ones that happen to ordinary people brave enough to believe they deserve them. Maggie had arrived in Ridgeway invisible and resigned to a half-life of service. She'd leave this world decades later as a woman who'd lived fully, loved deeply, and taught hundreds of people, children and adults alike, that it's never too late to be seen, to learn, to grow, to matter. And Caleb, who thought his capacity for love had died with his family, discovered that the heart is more resilient than he'd ever imagined. That grief doesn't prevent new joy, it makes it more precious. That choosing to love again after loss isn't betrayal but courage. They grew old together on that ranch, their love not a wildfire but a steady flame that warmed them through countless winters. And when people asked, as they often did, what made their marriage work, Maggie would smile and say simply, "He sees me," and Caleb would add, "And she lets me," which was, in the end, everything that mattered.